I think if you really focus on doing your recovery work for your unique process addiction and not letting the books tell you what problem you have, the book doesn't know who you are. Don't let my podcast tell you what problem you have, right? I've met some of you, and some of you are in my program, but I haven't met a lot of you, right? So don't let me define your addiction. Don't let your therapist define your addiction, right? Really reflect back and ask yourself, what was I after? What was I getting out of all of this? And have I done the recovery work to remove it from my life? Have you revisited the definition of sobriety and recovery? And here's the reason I bring this up, right? It's important to do, especially for those who plan to stay sober and go into long-term recovery, right? And we know, right, the relapse rate's extremely high in this addiction, right? They say it's just shy of 70% of men who are experiencing a significant relapse 5 years into recovery. Now, I don't bring that statistic up to scare you. I don't think that is a guaranteed thing. In fact, I know it's not a guaranteed thing. I have not experienced a significant relapse, and in my groups we see something like less than 2% of men who experience a relapse. So it is something that's absolutely avoidable. But I think that a lot of people are going about it the wrong way. And this episode, I think, is going to highlight probably what I believe is one of the biggest threats to that. And that is that we don't revisit what your recovery is, what your sobriety is. Right, and that's one of the tricky things with sex addiction is, unlike substance addiction, where not using the substance is the definition of sobriety, in sex addiction, because sex is such a fluid thing, and it means different things to different people. Right, there's religious beliefs, personal morals and values. There's marital contracts that you've committed to. Right, so it's this fluid thing that really needs to be defined by the individual. There is no standard definition of what is healthy and what is unhealthy. It's kind of different from person to person. Well, the problem with that is we have to define our sobriety, and we have to define the recovery path that will maintain it, right? Well, the problem is we have to figure out what we're addicted to, or what we're compulsive around, or what our problem was, right? As many of the listeners know, I'm not a massive fan of calling this a sex addiction, because I actually don't think that many men are addicted to it in that traditional sense, right? I think many of them have other drivers that have caused them to act out. So I really would encourage you guys to come back and redefine, or at least revisit, your definition of sobriety and the recovery that you need to engage in in order to achieve it. So what do I mean by this? Well, think about it. When you first get into this whole thing, you first get discovered by your wife, or you first decide that, hey, I have a problem. I need to go about stopping this. We really lean heavily on the books, the podcasts, the literature, your therapist, maybe some other guys that you've met in recovery, right? We really lean on them to help us figure out how to recover, how to get sober, what sobriety is, right? Here's the problem with that, though. Remember, this is an individual thing, right? The definitions of sobriety and healthy sexuality differ from person to person, and also the addiction itself, or the compulsivity itself, or the reason that we saw the infidelity or the sexual acting out, the cause and the why changes from person to person. So think about it. When you first get into this, here you are, you're going through, like, let's say you buy one of the workbooks out there and you're working through the workbook. I would say the bulk of the workbooks and the literature out there, because ITAP and the CSATs have kind of dominated this field. There are other professional groups out there. ITAP has just definitely had probably the biggest presence, right? So when you hear the word CSAT, a Certified Sex Addiction Therapist, that is one vertical, one certification. There are others out there, many others out there. So the point of this is the ITAP and the CSATs have definitely done a great job of kind of really getting this information out there. The issue with that is there's very much this, because it's CSAT, a Certified Sex Addiction Therapist. Most of the literature out there is very addiction focused, right? So there's a massive emphasis on you do this because you cannot regulate your emotions, right? So there's the belief that all of this sexual acting out is because of sadness, stress, unworthiness, feeling unlovable, etc. Right? So the emotion, you're feeling this unwanted emotion, and then you turn to sex, pornography, women, paid sex, whatever, as a way to pacify that. That could be the case. I've definitely met men who do this as response to uncomfortable emotions that they don't want to feel. Okay, so that definitely can be the case. But is it always the case? I haven't found that. Certainly, at least amongst the men in my groups, I would say that's actually probably like 1 in 5 guys, maybe even 1 in 10 guys who are actually triggered by a stress response or something else, and that triggers them to go act out sexually. That is a problem. But to assume that's your problem. Now I would ask the guys who are listening to this, if you are, if you're in 6 months into recovery, 1 year into recovery, kind of go back and really ask yourself, was that the driver? Right? Was it emotional? Was it dysregulation of your emotions that led you to do it? Personally, that was not the case for me. In fact, when I was stressed, sad, angry, frustrated, that was actually the times that I was the most sober. I don't feel like doing anything sexually when I'm, depressed or angry or frustrated or overwhelmed. That's actually the times that I'm the most sober, right? I'm usually focused on getting out of that stressful situation rather than escaping it. And a lot of high achieving men, I think that's a typical pattern for them, right? Avoiding things is actually not their preferred avenue. They like to meet things head on, right? And so that's a dominant belief. Another dominant belief is that you were traumatized in some way as your childhood trauma, and that childhood trauma directly has led to a lot of this. Yes, and have you revisited that concept? Because again, I think there's this emphasis on maybe sexual trauma or maybe parents who lacked attunement. And yes, again, there are guys in my groups who that is absolutely what happened to them and led to the behavior, but not always. I would say a good amount of the guys in my group, yes, we were traumatized as children in the sense that we were raised in a performance-based household, right? And so much of our grades, our performance, how good we were acting, right? That was how we were measured, right? Our family had a massive emphasis on being good, excelling, etc., right? And so we learned that by improving and being better at performing, right? Getting better grades, making more money, achieving, getting into a good school, climbing the ladder in your career, etc., that was how you become a valuable human being, right? So we had this, which is trauma, right? And so we had this overemphasis on performance and excelling and being better than others, right? And again, that is childhood trauma, okay? And that can lead to you then seeking attention and validation, right? Because that's the issue with performance-based praise, right? So my point of all this is have you gone back? Is it really emotional dysregulation? Do you really have that issue? And is that really the driver of your sexual acting out? And then from a childhood trauma standpoint, right? Like, yes, in the beginning, you were learning about all of these things around what is a healthy childhood and what is an unhealthy childhood. And most people are realizing that, if you were born before 2026, you did not have a healthy childhood. Parents just, that we're really starting to figure out how to parent kids, right? So you're starting to realize, okay, maybe my childhood and my upbringing wasn't as perfect. And it might not have even been your parents. It could have been mentors, your friend crowd, etc. There's lots of things that can go wrong in childhood that would lead to you seeking attention from women and having an unhealthy relationship with sex. But again, my point of this episode is, have you gone back and actually seen if that was really true? Because I think when we get into this, we're reading the books and our therapists and the other guys we meet, they're all trying to help us figure out how this happened, right? But I always found it quite interesting because it was like, everybody was like, I got stressed and then I acted out. And I never resonated with that ever. That was never a pattern of mine. Like I said, I like to face problems head on. So my preferred addiction, as most of you who listen to this episode, right? I would go seek out women to get their attention, their validation, right, that it was that conquesting and that conquering and getting their attention that made me feel good, right? And so it wasn't, that it wasn't an escaping my emotions. In fact, when I was in the bad emotional states, right, I chose to meet it head on. So my point of all of this is basically go back to that narrative that you told yourself about what made you act out and revisit it. And here's the reason I'm asking, and here's the reason I'm saying this is, again, a lot of people are like, Roland, this is all semantics. Why does this matter? It does matter because it then determines your recovery plan. Because think about it, if it really is stress at work or feeling unlovable or something like this in your home or in your marriage, etc., if that is the trigger, then that's your recovery work. Your recovery work is, I need to decrease stress in my life and I need to increase my self-worth and my lovability. Okay, right. So I'm not using porn or sex or women to escape that. But think about it. If that's actually not what drove your behavior, but all of your recovery is around stress management and feeling worthy, you might actually be in recovery. Right, if it's not the driver, because for me, when I first got into it, just like many of the guys, right, that was kind of the narrative was, I'm using this to escape. Right, so I was like, oh, okay, thank you for telling me, and so I got into recovery to try to again, right, manage my emotions, learn how to emotionally regulate in healthy ways. The problem was my addiction really didn't go anywhere, because that wasn't what caused me to act out. And so thank goodness I kind of recognized that. I was like, a lot of this recovery work, I'm doing all these check-ins with my wife as if I'm going to like act out at any second, and that's not really my issue, right? When I got discovered by my wife, it wasn't hard for me to stop these behaviors, honestly. Like it was actually quite easy to stop, and I really was thinking, I won't go back to this. I don't think that's going to be that hard. Now, again, I found some of the thoughts kind of creeping back in a year later, but it wasn't from stress. It was from wanting attention, validation. It was for the excitement of and the novelty of conquesting after women, etc. Like it still wasn't emotional. It wasn't like, oh, I'm so stressed out, because I really don't live a very stressful life. I've done extremely well for myself. I've sold businesses, built businesses, right? So stress just wasn't necessarily a massive issue for me. A lot of it was, again, feeling like if I don't have attention from other people, that I am not okay, right? So that was really what I needed to focus on in recovery was, why do I feel like I need to be special? Why do I feel like I need to be superior? Why do I feel like I constantly need people to tell me how great I am, how successful I am, how attractive I am, right? Why can't I just give that to myself? Why can't I just be okay as is? Why do I always need external validation, right? And so I'm giving you these examples just to say, if I would have focused on my stress response being the cause of all of this, or kind of healing childhood trauma, it would have really slowed down the actual recovery that I needed. Because the biggest threat to me truly was being out in public, being out on work conferences, being out, meeting people in airport lounges, whatever it be. Like, it was really the public and my desire to interact with women that was probably the biggest threat. Right, the pornography and all the paid sex and different things, like that stuff I actually really wasn't worried about getting into. It was those random interactions at conferences, etc., where I really saw the biggest threat. And I asked myself, am I going to be able to stop that? And my wife would even ask me, she would say, Roland, if you go and one of these women at one of these conferences decides to flirt with you, come on to you, are you going to respect the marriage? Are you going to find a way to get out of that situation? Or are you going to drink it in and enjoy it? Right. And my wife would always say, she's like, I'm not worried about you sleeping with them. I think you're going to draw the line there. My wife was just like, what I am concerned with is, are you going to let her flirt with you? And are you going to start to like it and flirt back a little bit? And you know what I told her? I was like, gosh, I can't tell you if I would stop that yet. Right, that's what I really told her. This was like 2 years or 3 years into recovery. 2 years into recovery, I think. I was like, I don't know. And so that was the point. Was my recovery really needed to shift towards stop needing other esteem and external validation, right? Stop pursuing other awards and buying fancy things and having other people look at me and tell me how great I am. Why can't I be great on my own? Now, again, what's my challenge for you? Go back for you guys, right? The reason I'm giving you examples of me is because I've only had my addiction. or compulsion. I haven't really had, for the listeners, I haven't had the problem that you have, and nobody has. Right, every single person has a unique driver that has caused them to act out in this way. So for those of you who have not really gone back to really ask yourself, what is my sex addiction, my process addiction? Right, what are these brain processes I'm addicted to? What was I really after when I was acting out? Was it really stress and emotional, sadness, and was it really emotions, or was it something different? Were you pursuing and chasing something else? Right. And then and the reason I'm asking all of you to challenge this is then go back and look at your recovery and say, have I changed? Have I actually eliminated these threats? Because again, I think the reason we see a high level of relapse in this particular field is not because the men aren't doing the work. It's not because they don't want to recover. It's not because they really, really want to relapse and they're like these crazy addicts. I don't believe any of that. I believe that they have not focused on the right things in recovery. And so then when these potential threats enter their life, they're actually not equipped to say no. They're not equipped to neutralize that situation. And then one thing leads to another and they find themselves, relapsing. And this is a very unfortunate and common story. But I don't think it has to happen. I think if you really focus on doing your recovery work for your unique process addiction and not letting the books tell you what problem you have, the book doesn't know who you are. Don't let my podcast tell you what problem you have, right? I've met some of you. Some of you are in my program, but I haven't met a lot of you, right? So don't let me define your addiction. Don't let your therapist define your addiction, right? Really reflect back and ask yourself, what was I after? What was I getting out of all of this? And have I done the recovery work to remove it from my life?